Hey guys, welcome back to our weekly Monday night question and answers chat with Les Crowder and Nathalie B. I'm your host, Nathalie, and I'm a Texas A&M master beekeeper. And I've been keeping bees for over 10 years in various kinds of hives. And I work with Les Crowder. Our big specialty is horizontal beekeeping, top bar beekeeping to be exact. But we have Langstroth, Layens, long Langs, all kinds of hives. So let me get people into the room and they can ask their questions. You can do the same on the comments and you can send us your questions at BeMindfulHoneyFarms@gmail.com or at b-mindful.com. And we'll post them and ask them on the chat to get your answers when you watch the replay. So let me welcome everybody. I've got Les joining in. I've got Deb. I've got Sherry. I've got Myron joining us for the first time and other people. So welcome everybody to the chat and question and answers tonight. Les Crowder, welcome. Thank you for joining us again for one of those wonderful sessions where we get to answer people's questions. And we start with a theme, which tonight, and it's going to be not our favorite theme, either one of us. It's going to be about taking notes and keeping notes for your apiaries so you can keep track of things, right, Les? Welcome.
Thank you. I bet Natalie was probably like, Les is going to talk about taking notes. We could just get him to take notes.
Right.
But sometimes, and the reason it's hard, you have a bee yard and you want to take notes. Some hives come and go. And I've had bee yards where I numbered all the hives and I moved the beehives and combined a beehive and made a divide. Pretty soon I have 2 number 2s, no number 3. And, it gets all, because the bees are constantly changing, and so what I like to do is say, I'll start at the front left. That's the first hive. I don't necessarily number them, but that's the first hive, second hive, third hive, and then work my way back if there's more than one row. And it really does help in many respects, because if you get any number of hives, you can't remember what they're doing and eat or how big they are. And I try to keep it very simple. I was always very dyslexic and didn't enjoy spelling and didn't enjoy writing in general with my hand. So I would just write 1 for the first hive. Now keep in mind, it might not be 1 next time, but that's fine. And then I'd have a symbol, a circle with a upside down cross, like the female symbol, and a little crown on it. That meant the queen. And I'd rate her from 1 to 5. 1 being really poor, 5 being excellent. So I just write the number.
Is this sign?
Yeah,
Or is it the female sign like this?
Yeah, like that.
The female sign.
Right. I would sometimes put a little crown on top of her head to make it the queen. And
something like this.
yeah, like that would work. And so then I'd write a number from 1 to 5 about her egg laying capacity. Mostly it was about her egg laying. How good was the tightness in the, how well was the brood laid up. A nice tight solid brood nest would be a 5, and a real loose poor one with few kept cells here, there, and everywhere was the number one. Mostly I judged the queen not by her appearance, but by her work in laying eggs. Keeping in mind, of course, that changed throughout the year. In other words, in the spring, she should be laying really well. Then if there's any dearth, you can't blame the poor egg laying pattern on her, because the bees are backfilling the brood nest, or not cleaning out brood for her, cells for her to lay brood in, because they want to drop the population. So a good queen can have a poor pattern if they're going into some kind of a weather-inspired dearth, be it winter or a brutal drought or whatever. A lot of queens will look poor at the beginning or during a dearth. And then when the flowers bloom, they snap right back to laying beautiful brood again. So don't judge them by the, at times of the year, you can't really tell the queen's egg laying capacity. And then I'd write another number, and it could be anywhere from 1 to 30. How many combs are they occupying? Sometimes I'd write like brood on every comb, or not much brood, or they're honey bound or whatever. And if I wrote honey bound, that would remind me next time I went out, I should be prepared to harvest some honey and try to break things up and give them more room. And then I go to the next one and the next one and the next one. So it's pretty straightforward. Now, the problem with this is that you get honey on your hands. Now you got to take notes with a pen and a piece of paper. The paper sticks to your hands, and then it sticks to the next paper over. So it was helpful to try to keep a clean hands, which I'm not famous for. I tend to get used to working with honey on my hands.
Mm-hmm.
And or propolis. But you have to try to keep your notebook from getting all stuck together. Now they make something called Right as Rain, little notebook that it's kind of got plastic-like pages and a marker, and you can write on it, and write in the rain. You can write, and let it just be sopping wet, and still write on it, and it won't wash off. And it won't, if they get a little stuck together, it won't tear the page when you tear them apart. So that's a good way to keep bee notes if you, especially during honey flows. During honey flows, it was very hard to take bee notes just because you couldn't you couldn't open the book because it was all stuck together because you had honey on your hands.
Mm-hmm.
But I just go on down the line or through the bee yard, and I counted at the very end. I wouldn't count at the beginning, because often when you start in a bee yard, by the time you get done, you've made a divide or two, or you've combined some hives. And there's a different number when you end than when you started. So I just count the ending number, not the number that had been there before, because that is gone. It's no longer nothing to worry about.
Right.
It's how many are there now. That's all that counts. And then I would write down at the bottom, bee yard needs. Like if I needed a stand because one of the beehives was sitting on the ground, or one beehive had a poor cover, or a cover blew off, I'd write, oh, I need to get a cover, because it's so easy to forget. Like Nathalie tried to get me to remember how many big nukes I put out, and I apparently didn't take very good notes. I'm gonna have to go drive all the way through all the bee yards and.
We'll work through it. We'll work through it. I mean, we can probably from memory just kind of figure it out. There might be some in your notes. I was just kind of asking last point blank, and he looked at me like, he was just kind of like, well. So,
Yeah.
by the way, Les, before we move forward, I wanted to say hi to our friends, Monty, Suburban Stockbuster on YouTube. Good evening. And James here in Texas, as well as a new follower, David. And I've got also Ashley. And Monty says, good topic. I'm horrible at keeping notes. And then Ashley says, well, she takes notes every time. She's my hero because I don't do that very well either. I'm better than you, I think, but
I'm with Monty.
yeah.
And a lot of times it doesn't matter what the notes say, it matters what you find in the beehive when you open it. But it can be very helpful to know what it had been like. And then there's like now, how many thick nukes are out there? If I had taken notes, I would have said, and then we wouldn't have to. In some cases, you have to drive back to the bee yard and then go, oh shoot, I forgot that.
Right.
And if it's an hour drive, well, you just forgot it. You're not going to go get it now.
Well, and to your excuse, we manage over 40 yards with over 300 colonies, between 300 and 350, and we work together as a team. So between the times I go to a yard and you come back the next time, it might not be always easy to pass the information through. So we have a very specific case that not everybody that's keeping bees in their backyard would have, but that's forcing us to kind of develop a system. And one of the things that we're doing is we tried a spreadsheet, which is not very convenient because you can't really read it very easily on your phone when you're in the field. Now we're trying a Google Doc, which we can share and collaborate with, and we're using a lot of those legends that Les was just kind of touching upon. So I'm going to show you, and I know it's reversed writing, but I've got Q for queen, plus if it's a queen right, I would put a minus if she's not there, or a question mark if I'm not sure. And then if she's really, really, really good, I'm going to put 3 pluses. So just 1 is a regular queen, 2 is like good queen, and then 3 is really a really good one. If I see her, I'm going to circle my plus. That means I've seen her. I'm always going to put the dates, and I'm writing on the bars, like Les was mentioning. BC is brood comb, DC is drone comb. If I write 8C, that's 8 comb. Small cell, swarm cells, sorry, is SC. P for pollen, nectar, and honey and eggs. So you make up your own, you can make up your own legend. You can make up your own system. But what it does is that all of a sudden, if I'm going to that number 1 hive, and we're going to start numbering them because it's too hard to keep track of things. It's a double tuber hive, or I would put a lang, L-A-N-G for lang. Left side, I've got queen plus, the P is high. That means there's a lot of pollen. NH is nectar and honey is low. That means I know that's, when we need to watch the food. And I keep going using my legend. And you can do the same thing with your own legend, but using just single letters. And I came up with this I realized after the fact that there's another beekeeper way back when that was Doolittle. I think he does the same thing. He's talking about some of this stuff. And I was like, oh, I guess I came up with the same idea after the fact that I was reading his book. And I was like, hey, that's what I'm doing. Almost the same legend, right? So it's an easy way to kind of shorthand your notes. You can do it on the bars. If you're not kind of doing too many manipulations, you're going to know where your last bar was. And it's a horizontal in this case, top bar hive. It's not a Langstroth, but you're going to know what your last bar was last time you were there. You put the date that tells you what's the last time you were there as well. And then taking those notes home, then you can kind of see what you're doing and what you've got. If you need to bring, like Les was mentioning, I got to bring this, I got to bring legs, I got to bring lids. I, need to check back in 2 weeks because they might be swarmy, or every week if they're really close. Or I need to bring feed. I need to do all kinds of things. So rather than having to go back always in your hives to kind of like, oh, well, let me check. It's great to have an instant picture. And you should always value that as your overall most important piece of information. But, before you open the hive, if you already know kind of what was going on in there 2-3 weeks ago, that should really help you decide how much you want to be invading their privacy and what how long your visit's going to be, right? If they were just really good last time with a high population and a great queen, and you kind of crack it open and you see they're still doing good, well, the assumption is the queen's still going to be there. It's true with the Langstroth, it's true with the Tabar hives. And actually, commercial beekeepers I've been talking to have told me that for Langs, and anyway, because that's what they're keeping, they don't even go through the frames. They don't even look at the edges of the brood nest. They crack the lid open, pull that inner cover, and look in there. And if there's a high population, they don't even go through it. They'll close it right back. 5 minutes less, they're done. If they look and there's not a lot of population, that's when they start digging in and looking at those brood frames on the edges and kind of deeper and deeper if needed. So that kind of also, that note-taking helps you in some cases, just kind of not invading the bee's privacy, right, Les? Excuse me.
Yeah, there's a thing I call overexposure.
Right.
When we open the beehive, like with Tupper hives, I try to, I open the back combs that, well, the top bars that hopefully doesn't have a comb on it first, just to make room, and then work my way into the combs. When I pull the combs back, I keep them together fairly tight, so they still have a semblance of air control between the combs, because you don't really want to tear it all apart and put this comb here and this next comb 3 inches away from it, where all the dry or cold or warm or air is exposed to the brood, because that's hard on the brood. So I try to keep the combs together as much as possible and work my way through. And yeah, like you said, if I'm looking for swarm cells, I'll lift a few top bars at a time, often lift 2 at once, and just look very quickly along the bottom and kind of side edges. And if I don't see any queen cell cups or swarm cells, in 3 or 4, if there's 10, 20 combs, well, there's probably not going to be any. I don't have to lift every single brood comb to look for swarm cells, because once they start, they kind of start throughout the brood. Mm-hmm. And I don't need to take them all apart. Just take a quick check, get to some unkept brood, and then put them all back together. I once had some interns time me in a bee yard without their help, and I was spending about 2.5 minutes per hive. And a lot of that was, some hives, it was barely a minute. But then it's the problem hives that take your time. Mm-hmm. Like, this one seems queenless. Let's see what is going on here. Is it already drone or laying workers? Or, that's what takes your time. Or this one needs to be divided. I like to find the queen when I make a divide. That can take some time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's always what the thinking through the strategy, and then cracking open potentially several hives or remediating the situation is what takes the longest. But you're right. I mean, it doesn't have to take that long, and it shouldn't, neither in a horizontal nor in a vertical hive, if you know what you're looking for, right? The other reason why it's good to kind of keep track of what you're doing is to know what's going on with your queens. If you're doing any kind of like tracking how well a queen is doing, and if you want to use it as a breeder for your yard or want to propagate her genetics around, that's a good idea to kind of keep track of what's attached to those queens. It's not always certain in our case, because we don't mark our queens that she hasn't swarmed. But if you keep your timing regular in a way that you know when to come back before they swarm, you can kind of catch that. But again, it goes through pretty good note taking. So by the way, Deborah is saying she's from she's in the mountains of North Carolina. It's good to see you, Deb. And she says she had a notebook like the one that you mentioned earlier that you can write on in the rain. So when she was a hiker, she was using that. And now she uses an app called Hive Bloom to take her notes. And it might not be adapted to a lot of your hives, but that's the one she uses. There's also all kinds of apps, by the way, out there. That's another alternative. Most of us have our phones with us, and we can kind of like enter or notes on that really quick, there's like, you can push buttons and kind of do that really quickly. But of course, if you have a ton of hives, that becomes a little tedious and hard to do. And sharing.
Well, maybe a generational thing, but I often leave my phone in the pickup.
Yep.
And I also don't like to get honey all over my phone.
I've been known to put it in my pocket of my bee suit, and now I'm being very careful to put it with the microphone up, because what happens is get gunked up with waxes or stuff that's at the bottom of my pockets, and then I can't even charge my phone anymore. I've had to take it to the Apple store before. So you have to be careful with your phone. But that brings up a good point, because another thing that you can do, and I don't have one here, but we started using also for hands-free, if you don't want, if it's a quick visit, or if you want to take content for your YouTube channel or your lessons, or even for yourself, so that you don't have to take notes. You can use one, what is called a chest strap, and it's got a mount for your phone that you can strap onto the harness, and you can just film what you're doing, like hands-free. So it's kind of like taking what you're looking at into the phone, and then you can go home and you can analyze what you've seen, or you can send pictures if you are getting help from somebody remotely or whatever. And that helps you kind of keep track of the actual situation rather than taking hand notes, right? The only problem with that is I always tell myself I'm going to rewatch that video, and I'm going to take the hand notes at home to look at and have to share with Les more easily, for example, and then never do it. So I have tons and tons and tons of videos. And when I go back to the yard the next time, I don't necessarily know what happened, because I didn't type up my notes, right, Les?
Yeah, and you can't find them.
You
can't find them.
I have to scroll through all my, so if you do that, I highly encourage you to create folders on your photos, so that you can say, hey, this is hive number 1. So all those photos, all those videos are going to hive number 1, or yard number 2. And these are all the hives, kind of find a system that works for you. But there's value in keeping good notes for your bees.
I found it very difficult to number the hives. Like you were putting numbers on the beehive, but then there's a bee yard where there's 1,
yeah, it's not
3,
working.
15, and 2 15s maybe, and because things constantly move and change. So I just said, oh, there's 12 beehives in this bee yard, and it's starting at the left front. That's 1 at that time.
Right.
The next time I come back, it might be completely. It's still going to be 1, and the next one's going to be 2, but that might be in a divide I made from 1. So now through it'd be 4, but I don't care. I just say, there's 12 beehives, and the first one, the second one, the third one, on down the line. I don't try to keep them, because bees come and go a lot.
Right. In our yards, they do. Yes, they do.
Yeah.
By the way, Les, I don't know if that's of interest to anybody, but we've been talking about making splits and potentially putting those splits in the same yard, taking the queen, a bunch of a few combs of food and brood, and a bunch of bees, and splitting them when they're ready to swarm, and kind of swarm them for them, so that we can harvest that split. And we've been talking about putting them into the same yard, because they're not necessarily, if those are young bees, they're not going to go back, and it's kind of easier for us rather than having to transport those bees. But Les, I was thinking about something. The more we do that, the more we're risking inbreeding of the new queens, future generations, to be going with drones that they're related to when they go mating in those similar drone congregation areas. So I mean, I don't know what you think. What do you think? That's my question. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's something to that. You don't split them 6 ways, so you just have a mother and a daughter. And if there's, like we have some beehives with 10 or 20 beehives in them, then that's not a terribly high percentage, but it is an issue. The old beekeepers used to say, if you make a divide in 1 yard, take it to the other. But if you only have 1 yard, I don't know what you would do. You have no choice really but to keep the mother and the daughter. But I've seen, I once did a bee removal in California where it was in an old barn and they swarmed and went right into the next cavity over and started their combs there,
Right.
the new hive. So I've seen them kind of hang out pretty close to each other anyway.
Right.
But yeah, if it's convenient, it's a great idea to take the bees with you to a different bee yard.
Yeah.
Just to look up the genetics.
Yeah, I mean, if that happens too often, I was just concerned. I was just kind of wondering. And I think that according to the biology of the honeybee from Winston, which is a great book, I really recommend it to everybody if you want to understand the bee biology. They swarm distance that's being covered by a swarm is on average about a third of a mile, right? So it could be anywhere before or after, but the greatest majority of them go in about a radius of a third of a mile, so that they try to kind of have some distance between the mother colony and the new colony. So I've got some, by the way, James is saying the way he keeps track of his brood frames, or at least the first one, I believe he's moving everything to Tabar. He's using the trick from, who gave us that trick? That was Brandon Fahrenkamp, another Tabar beekeeper friend of ours. He's using push pins, and apparently James is using the same thing to mark his very first brood frame, and then he gets a different color to mark his honey frames, probably yellow, and then a third color, maybe white, to mark his last frame the bees have built comb onto. So have you ever used that system, Les?
No, I could see myself having a bunch of push pins scattered around the pickup.
In my pockets and poking my fingers.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great idea. It makes sense, but I haven't tried it.
So y'all have to know that Les is a minimalist. He doesn't like to have too many things that he's dragging around or having to think about or purchasing or anything like that. Plugging a hole, the entrance hole of a hive, just shove a bunch of grass in the hole. Brush your bees, no bee brush, you just grab a clump of grass, same thing, you brush them over. Just he comes in with his head, his hive tool and his smoker, and that's it. No gloves, no suits. He has a suit in the truck now, but just in case. And that's about all your beekeeping gear, right, Les?
That's the bulk of it. I've always been a bit of a minimalist. I used to be able to move, put everything in a relatively small backpack. I don't know why, but I've just gravitated towards that idea that why do we need all this stuff? I see that most Americans can't park in their garage because their garage is full of stuff. And I thought, well, that's not my way. My garage would be totally easy to park in.
Right.
And I carry that over to my beekeeping. Like all these gadgets, you look in the dead end catalog.
Oh my gosh.
It's this thick. And it's a whole bunch of gadgets and chemicals and stuff. I don't need any of that. All I need is a veil, hive tool, and smoker. And, a beehive, obviously.
Right, exactly. And because we in a bucket sometimes when it's
yeah.
But and a little Tabar nuke so that you can leverage the
that comes in real handy. Yeah. Having a little Tabar nuke that you just carry around empty.
Right.
So you have to come out and you're thinking, do I need to make a divide? You're not sure, but there's the queen. Oh, quick, put her in that little nuke.
Yeah.
Now, if you decide, I need to make a divide, you already know where she is. Yeah. She's safe. She didn't fall on the ground.
That's contained. Right. You don't even use a clean clip. You just take the whole bar and set it aside for a little bit. But you can do the same thing with langs, by the way, guys. You can have a little, one of those corrugated plastic lang boxes, and you can have it in your truck. It can even be non-folded, and you can just fold it on the spot and do the same thing. Use that to hold your frame so they're not, tipped over on the ground, so that you can make sure your queen is safe, so you can make splits, so you can harvest honey. There's all kinds of things you can do with that if you're going to a remote yard, that is. I always assume people are going to remote yards, but not everybody's doing that. So Sherry says she thinks she tends to be too slow while trying to be calm. And it seems like a balancing act because, you know, there's such a thing as trying to be in and out without taking too much time. And then at the same time, we don't want to move too fast. So Les, what's your trick on being basically poised and slow, but fast at the same time?
Well, part of it is if you're in the top bar hive, the combs you take up and look at, put them back. If you're going to keep going through the hive, put them back snug against the last comb. So because that means the two combs are not very far apart and they can form with their bee bodies kind of a curtain and hold the air inside there better. That's particularly important with brood, so that you're not really taking them apart very much. Some of it's just experience, because when I was a kid, I would take a hive apart and I'd look at every single comb on both sides, probably for half a minute or so, maybe longer, and then put it down and get the next one and look through every single comb. And pretty soon you get to realizing, well, there's a honey here, there's a little pollen here, there's brood coming next, a little bit of brood, and more brood, and then more brood, and then a lot of brood, and then less and less, and then pollen, and then honey. And you realize, though, there's a pattern. I need to take the beehive all apart. Once I dig into that pattern far enough to see good brood, maybe I'm done. You know, are they going to swarm? Well, I might want to see some combs of uncapped brood and just check for queen cell cups on the bottom. If there's no queen cell cups, I'm done. And then put them right smack back together again. But some of that just takes experience, because at first you're like, well, I don't know what, you know, how much brood there is. And then it can be, like I used to work for, briefly for a woman who was pollination broker in the almonds in California. And we'd pop the lid, like Nathalie was saying, and we'd see that the bees were usually kind of circular inside the rectangular Langstroth hive. And we counted the number of combs that were covered with bees. And if it was 8 combs or 9 combs, oh, they're great. They pass with flying colors. If there's only 6 combs, then you wouldn't get a full. And we would never take the combs out and look at what's on the combs. You can tell by the tightness of the bees and the way they're clustered around in a sort of a circle in between the frames. You can tell, oh, they've got a great population. They're really together. They have a good queen. They're bringing in pollen. And just looking at them bringing in lots of pollen tells you there's lots of brood, because they mostly bring in pollen for brood. So then you don't need to tear it all apart and dig your way through it and create more trouble for yourself, really.
So I'm laughing because Monty Suburban Sodbuster on YouTube saying most Americans can park in their garage because it's full of stuff. And he's like, now I'm feeling attacked. And then James goes on, says, garage, question mark. I lost my den years ago. And I'm like, I've got bee stuff all over my house. So, I mean, I can feel your pain, guys. But to go along with what you're saying, Les, how about this little drawing? This is a horizontal configuration. It could be a layance, right, Monty? It could be a long lang. It could be any kind of horizontal configuration, and to a certain extent, a Langstroth with 10 frames or 8 frames. But here you got nothing on these bars. This is a view from the top of the bars. And you got nothing here, nothing here. And if you marked down, if you took notes and you put an H, this is all honey, you know? So you can open here, pull out those empty bars, and then you can crack it between these two and pull the entire 4 or 5 bars of honey back. And now you have access to honey nectar and maybe some nectar. And then you can pull those two and kind of see you've got brood comb. You don't have to kind of go through every single bar when you're cracking open a hive, right? You can pull one out to make some space, whether it's a Langstroth, Layens, any kind of frame hive, and any kind of horizontal hive, especially. You can pull out what you don't need. You know that if there's honey, you know it's honey. It's not going to be really much going on there, and pull all of it out to the side so that you can grab one comb or two and then put it all back together. So taking those notes that way also helps you kind of figure out a way to be a lot less intrusive and time consuming, and just basically be fast in your visit while you still take the time to move slow, right? So that's kind of like where you gain some time back, like Les was saying, with the closing of the bars or closing on the side. So just something to keep in mind.
But move slow. Yeah, you want to move kind of slow and smooth. I see a lot of beekeepers that kind of, their hands are constantly doing back and forth and back and forth. Once you get your hand on the other side of the top bar hive,
or the bird's nest of any kind, right?
Or the Langstroth, you don't need to bring it back and forth and scratch your nose and go back and forth. Try to keep it over there, because it's the crossing over that causes their attention. Once it's over, you can lift, put it down, lift the next one, put it down. But just remember to move efficiently. Like be very deliberate in your motion and be
have a plan.
And you wind up getting through your hive really fast, even though you're moving slow.
Well, and again, to your point, just kind of have a plan and know the biology of the superorganism. Your point of the brood's nest surrounded by the pollen, surrounded by nectar and then honey. If you know that, then it makes your visit a lot faster. You don't have to go through everything and just kind of put your eyes on everything. So that allows you to move a little bit slower when you're doing the important parts. But you mentioned once before, Les, how bees function at a much higher frequency. And so when we move slow, they can't really see us, especially if we're not blocking the sunlight between them and the bird's nest, between the sun and the bird's nest. If we don't move really fast, then they don't see us as well, right?
Right, and I think it's a lot like the minute hand of the clock. We don't see it move, but we look back at another 2 minutes and it's moved, but we can't really see that it's moving. And honeybees are faster paced than we are, and they don't see this kind of motion at all. And I've tested it many times. It's easy to do. You get some bees that are a little jumpy and just move your hand very slowly, and you'll see them not even look and then jerk it around a little bit, and they'll fly right up to your hand. And so they didn't even notice the slow motion. And so I think it's our hand can be like the minute hand of the clock. Right. And this keeps them very calm and gentle. And it's not like magic or anything. It's just learning to work with their perceptive abilities and not be perceived more as a peaceful part of the landscape instead of a predator.
Right. And somebody, you've said it like moving like Tai Chi, kind of very smooth and no brusque movements. And a friend of ours says it's like moving in through molasses. It's just kind of like thick and sticky, and you just kind of like don't go too fast that way. But have a plan, know your biology and your layout of the nest, and having those notes again is going to help you. Ray, coming back to notes, Ray's asking, do you comment in on notes on defensiveness of the hive? And if so, how do you use it to your benefit, basically to your knowledge?
That's a good point. I don't make a comment unless there's an issue. If it's exceptionally tame or calm, I might mention that. But certainly if it seems excessively prone to sting, I would mention that. And then maybe come back and be prepared for that next time. If they aren't prone to sting next time, I'll make a note, oh, they were fine this time.
Mhm.
They've been sort of jumpy last time, but they're fine this time. But if they are consistently of a really cross temperament, I may want to requeen that hive
Mhm.
because you don't have to put up with bees that just, kind of, I really don't like working through a bee yard with lots of bees.
Buzzing in your
Trying to
face,
get to
yeah.
my nose through the veil. I'd rather work where occasionally one gets after me and then forgets and wanders. And it's much more calm and peaceful.
And keep in mind, guys, that a colony that's gotten irritated or mean overnight between your last visit and this visit, it's probably not a bad genetics. It's probably not Africanized. It's most likely environmental or circumstantial in some cases as well. They could be requeening themselves. They could be a supersedior. They might have lost their queen. They might be swarming. There might be something major going on inside the hive, or there might be weather. They might not have enough food. There might be a predator or pest that's bothering them. And in that case, that's more of a moodiness than it is really something genetic. The true genetic defensiveness comes along even on small colony, but like you said, Leslie, it will happen every time you come and visit. And also it will be the more guards that they have, it will happen more consistently. But keep in mind, it doesn't have to necessarily be something that's linked to the genetics and over defensiveness, like Africanized genetics or anything like that. Any colony that's growing in size and that's well established and is starting to get large will over time develop more and more defensiveness because they'll have more and more guards, more and more population to bring up and the defense mechanism. So even those Italians that we think are so gentle have the potential at some point to, when they're really large, to get more defensive as well. So just keep all that in mind when you're deciding if you want to requeen a colony because of their genetics, because of their defensiveness. A lot of people say usually 3 strikes and you're out, right? But if you're not in an urban area, if you're not in an area that you can get hurt and you don't mind too much, a little bit more defensiveness, some of those larger colonies or a little bit more defensive colonies might be okay. But by all means, don't make it a nuisance and definitely not a dangerous situation, right?
Right. I mean, I've had somebody ask me if I would requeen his beehive in downtown, well, not downtown, but residential Austin. And when I got there, he said, oh, let me call my neighbors, tell them to put their dogs up because I don't want my bees stinging their dogs.
Mm-hmm.
And that made me like, oh my gosh, this is really not a good scene. He had 3 very large Langstroth hives in a very upper class neighborhood of Austin. And he was having to call his neighbors when he was working his bees, or they would sting the dogs on the other side of the fence. He said, you know what we need to do is just lift the beehives up and take them out of here. I will requeen them out in a distant bee yard out in the country because I don't want to read about myself in the local news where somebody got stung real badly and it got newsworthy. And
that happened at that happened at the community first village where they had an event where something like that happened, and they ended up having the firefighters and everybody kind of coming on site. So you just kind of have to be careful, especially in an urban environment, especially if you've got anybody that's more vulnerable to bee stings and not being able to get away, animals, things like that. So just keep that in mind. But to your point, Ray, that's a very good question. The other thing that you probably want to tie it back to taking notes, you want to take, if you take those notes, also take notes of what else is going on in the hives and on your weather, and just kind of like look at what's happening there, and if there's any kind of correlation that can inform the reason why they're being so defensive.
And another thing that would be good to put on a jot down on the, not beehive by beehive, but what's blooming if the bees are working. And is it, beginning to bloom or is it ending? That can be helpful because then next year, oh, that always blooms this time of the year. And so I can be expecting it next year in April or whenever it blooms. And that can be valuable to your long-term beekeeping knowledge of the area.
Yep. And by the way, I want to say hi to Bruce Rodriguez on Swarmstead Bees and Gardening on YouTube. He's got a great channel. Both he and Suburban Sodbuster Monty have great channels if you want to take a look. Monty specialized in layers hives, and he's got very good educational videos that apply a lot to frame and horizontal. So it's kind of a midway, but very educational. I really enjoy his videos. That's Suburban Sodbuster. And then Bruce on Swarmstead Bees and Gardening has a great channel as well. He talks a lot about swarm trapping and keeping bees naturally treatment free, basically just kind of survival of the fittest. And he's got lots of experience with a lot of different ways to catch bees. So if that's something that interests you, I'll encourage you to go take a look. And then I've got, I missed a question from Sherry. She was like, I wondered if the signal from the phone when we video would disturb the bees. And I know when they're irritated, when there's something, they're in defensive mode, they will attack things that are dark, like a phone case, GoPro case, anything that's dark, they will go and sting it. So I don't know if it's necessarily the electronics, but there's something to be said about that. I put mine on do not disturb so it doesn't ring, and it's just kind of passively filming. I don't know if it makes a difference. I've been filming a lot and I haven't noticed them being disturbed. What's your thought, Les? Have you ever, when you were filming bees, noticed any kind of triggering on their end?
Yeah, I think they do look at it as a big, well, like I've had people with cameras photograph or filming, and the big black eye seems to really attract the bees.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't say, it does seem like if I answer my phone,
right,
they'll come in my hand. But
mm-hmm.
if I keep it, and I just leave it in the pickup for the most part. But I am going to try to remember to wear that harness and use it in the bee yard more. And we'll see. It doesn't seem to be as much of an issue with square phone. I wonder sometimes because we know the bees go for your eyes,
Mm-hmm.
because they know that that's where they can do the damage. Like if a bear is opening a beehive, he doesn't care if you get stung on the back. He can't hardly get stung on the back.
Mm-hmm.
If it's right in his eye, that's going to turn him around. So the bees go for your eyes, and if they see that big black round camera lens, they have a tendency to go after it.
So I have a question from Richard. He's buying queens for his club for next year, and he's asking, all else being equal, is it better to get a newly mated queen, a fresh one that's basically not proven, versus an overwintered queen, one that's managed to get through the winter? Les, what's your take on that?
Well, we used to have bees that lived a lot longer. And I saw recently where they've been doing this experiment, I forget which bee lab, and they're saying that the bees, in general, are living about 50% as long as they used to live back in the 50s. And that's very disturbing to me, because that means that there's something wrong with the environment that is causing bees to have shorter lives. And we've certainly noticed this. Like we used to consider a 7-year-old queen getting kind of old. Now you'd say a 7-year-old queen was almost unheard of. And people say, oh, you should requeen every year. Or even there are some people are requeening twice a year. Well, that's getting to be ridiculous to me, because it takes a while for the new queen to even get accepted in the groove. So it doesn't, there is an issue there. And I think it's background contamination from all the various chemicals that are in our environment.
And the miticides in the hives that negatively impact the drones.
Right. A lot of those chemicals are put in the beehives by the beekeepers that are bad for the bees. we know that the miticides are bad for the bees. Even essential oils aren't really good for the bees. I've proved that to myself by trying and found that the bees didn't do well at all when I put essential oil in there. And so we need to be careful about what we do, but then the whole environment is somewhat degraded. But if you have a queen that was raised last fall and overwintered, I think she'd be fine. If you have a really old queen, I'd be a little bit dubious. It's a little hard to tell, but the smoothness of her abdomen, if there's a little bit of velvety fur on her abdomen, she's pretty young still. If her abdomen is pretty worn smooth, and if her wings are getting a little bit tattered, that's a sign of her age. You know, she's getting older. I guess I would go with young, overwintered queens would be fine.
Yeah, that's what I think as well. I'm not a big purchasing queens kind of a person because I like swarm unless I know they're coming from swarm cells in a nuke and all the stuff. Because I don't really buy the value of grafted queens other than a lot of numbers, push them out and have them available for commercial beekeepers and a lot of people that want to replace their queens. But there's so many other ways that you can introduce queens in your apiaries. And I highly recommend everybody keeps small mating nukes and just kind of get their hands cutting out swarm cells or trying to split or doing things, having them as backup in the little, holding area for when you need a queen is, and they're going to be raised from swarm cells, which is going to be the best quality of queens. It's really valuable for your apiary. Now, I know people still want to buy queens to make splits because they don't want their queens to go open mating and all that stuff. Well, guess what? Those queens that are being sold to you mated, they've been open mating. That's the only way a queen can go mate unless you're doing artificial insemination. So unless we're buying artificially inseminated queens, the ones that we're buying are still going out and mating with who knows what, right? So from that standpoint, I would say it's kind of a toss-up. The advantage of buying a queen that's been overwintered is her quality, how well she's doing. She's proven and she's probably at the peak of her production. It used to be 2-3 years when she was reaching a couple years into it, she was reaching peak of her production. Because their life is shortened a little bit, I think that it's probably still good in her beginning of her second year, and then you can try to keep her as long as she's performing. Personally, I don't like getting rid of queens unless I know there's an issue, right? Because we're eliminating a genetic line possibly that could be used for improving the genetics in your area. If she's still doing well, it's a very risky endeavor to replace queens anyway, because especially with purchased queens, especially with queens that are not from the same exact species, they might not be very well accepted. And there's evidence that a lot of times it doesn't go as well as we planned, right? So it's good to know what you have, and you don't always know what you're getting. So, and on top of that, you don't know if she's going to be accepted. So just kind of keep that in mind. If you're I don't know, Richard, if you're buying queens for specific purposes, it's for splitting, for requeening, for growing your apiary. I'm not sure, but that might also go ahead.
It's for whatever the club members want to do with it, mostly splitting. So, I mean, we're targeting to get these queens in April.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the ones in the spring, they are somewhat proven. They do let them lay eggs for about 2 weeks before they harvest them.
Okay, which is good, because that's the other aspect of things. If they don't let them, if as soon as she lays eggs, they harvest them, they don't know the quality, but also they don't let her develop her ovaries, right?
Right, that's a good breeder that's doing that. And I know that people want to try breeds or varieties. I've heard about the mite biter bees, or the Russian bees, or the New World cardiolans. and you want to give them a try, there's nothing wrong with trying that. I agree with Natalie that I pretty much like to just raise my own, have the bees raise their own themselves. But
Sorry, that was my 5 minutes alarm. We've got 5 minutes to ask your questions, guys.
but yeah, so sometimes you want to try something you read about that sounded really cool. Just keep in mind you're buying them from like maybe Minnesota or New York, and they're a completely different climate. And they did really well up in that climate. They might not do as well in southern Texas or wherever you're taking them.
Local survivor stock. Repeat after me. Local survivor stock. Basically, bees that do well on their own and that are really locally adapted to your cycles of weather and forage is what's going to do best for you. So, but I'm assuming you're getting those in Texas anyway. I want to ask a question from James because he's been waiting very patiently, and we might not be the best to answer that question because he's asking about technology. Is there an app that will tell you what is blooming in the area? So if anybody has the info or a good app that does that, let me know. Les, do you know anything like that? And I know I'm kind of laughing because I'm asking you that question.
Yeah. I'm not big on apps, and I mean, I do have a phone, but I often leave it behind. And I know now that people can't even drive anywhere without Google Maps. And I thought, well, we did fine for most of my life without Google Maps. And I'm still doing pretty well without Google Maps most of the time. So, no, I don't know. And that's why I like to take notes. That's half of beekeeping sometimes, is watching the bees out in the field, seeing a tree in bloom and pulling over and see if there's bees on it and what time of the year is it, what is this bush. I know there's an app for that to identify the bush. It seems to work pretty good.
There's a bunch of, yeah. Yeah, there's a picture. This is a good one. There's a bunch of apps where you can identify by taking a picture, and they might have some blooming information from that standpoint. But then the beauty of what we're doing tonight is we're doing both on Zoom and on YouTube. And Deb on YouTube, on Zoom, is telling me Xerces Society, xerces.org will have, it's not an app, but it's a website that will apparently have your local pollination information. So try that, maybe that will help out. And then Monty says the worst queen that he's ever had was one he purchased. It was raised locally, but he had to cull her and combine that colony with another. He'll be raising his own from his own stock in the future. And you can also catch swarms, and you can, trap swarms, and you can do all kinds of things. But and you might, it doesn't mean your queens are going to be the best. It means that, you have a higher chance of potentially getting something that's going to be okay. Now, if you catch a first swarm, a primary swarm, you might be getting a queen from you would be getting a queen from last year. If you're getting after swarms, then there might be fresh virgin queens that are going to need to go mating. So keep that in mind as well. But there's nothing wrong with trying to raise your own queens. I would highly encourage you to learn how to do that, learn the biology of the honeybee so that you can leverage that aspect of their biology for your own benefit. And it's a great way to learn how they function and what makes them healthy. Right. And identify potential problems at the same time. So Sherry was saying a few weeks ago, we spoke about mice getting into beehives. She was wondering why the bees don't immediately attack and kill them. I guess it's all a matter of identifying and cornering the intruder, right, Les?
Well, but mostly the damage is done when it's cold.
Mm-hmm.
Mice are always there and the bees are keeping them out. But when it gets really cold and the bees form a cluster, they can't send a bee to go sting the mouse. They just hang in their cluster. And they have to ignore the vibrations and the chewing and the smell because if a bee breaks cluster, she freezes. So it's mostly an issue when you have cold weather that the bees don't chase the mice out. In the warm weather, the mouse wouldn't dare to get in the beehive because it'd be stung 6 times In a minute, they'd be stung all over and probably be killed even by the bees.
I want to wave at Bruce on YouTube. He's too kind. I said I always recommend his channel, he and Monty's, and he's like, I always appreciate it, and I'm honored by your support and recommendations. So let's you know that we've got it's Monty that's saying that, sorry. Monty is saying that, and so we're really grateful for you, and we think that you've got good content, so definitely always glad to recommend you. And I was going to say something about taking pictures of the flora and fauna. Christine was saying it also displays what is local for the area. Sherry's saying a wealth of info. Thank you so much. And Deborah was saying, I really appreciated your video on how to introduce a Langstroth nuke to a top bar hive. Basically, I'm making that modification now. So by the way, Richard, if you go on Facebook, he's got a very interesting concept. It's called, what is it called, Richard?
The hybrid hive.
The hybrid hive. It's a Facebook group. The hybrid hive. It's basically the concept of taking the Langstroth nuke and affixing it to a top bar part of things. It's beautiful. He makes everything handmade. It's custom made. It's just gorgeous. If you ever look for that kind of a setup and you're in the area, I highly recommend it. And I was lucky enough to talk to Richard last week about the one that I purchased for the teaching apiary. And we're actually going to do it with a 8-frame Langstroth box attached to a Taubar box, so that it will be leveraging the entire power of an actual full-size colony to grow faster into the Taubar. And so that's the kind of like the concept on steroids, but also it's kind of really a hybrid between the two. You can go back and forth. If you have top bars, you can generate Langstroth nukes and sell those, or vice versa. And if you have, by the way, I want to remind everybody, if you have a large Langstroth and you want to try top bar hive, and it is a very easy way to do that. You make a little tiny top bar nuke. You can use our plans at be-mindful.com, be-mindful.com/plans, and you make a tiny little one that's about anywhere from 5 to 10 bars long, and you remove one end and you slap it against the Langstroth hive, drill a hole in the Langstroth where the brood nest is, put the bars, and make sure that the only entrance is through that top bar nuke. And make sure also that you don't have any honey in the lang next to the top bar, but you push all that to the outside, and only the brood will be next to the top bar nuke. And now you can have a very large colony that's producing a lot of comb that's got nowhere to build it but in the top bar nuke, and then start putting babies in there. And then you can throw top bar nukes, as many as you can split that hive as it grows. And that's another easy way to do this, even if you don't have a top bar hive. So there you go. We're kind of like bringing up a whole bunch of variations on that concept. Deborah says the easy nuke is really easy to modify. Yes, that corrugated plastic white nuke, that's like a really square kind of box. And then you do the same thing. You use the end piece of the top bar. You set that plastic box on it with the lid opening away from the top bar. And then you have a wall that's you can cut through the shape of your top bar hive. You put all your bars and they start moving in to the top bar. So the only difference with that, it's super easy. You can purchase a Langstroth nuke and do it automatically. So if you can only find packages, but you wanted to start with a Lang with a nuke, then you have that option because they're 4 to 6 weeks ahead. The only thing is that if you miss your nectar flow, you're kind of stuck with that, you know, halfway hybrid thing. So just keep that in mind. But yeah, and then when they're done and they've got enough and there's brood in the top bar and enough food, you can just pull out everything from the Langstroth and harvest the honey and make sure the queen is and the bees are staying. So there's all kinds of ways you can do that. But that's because we kind of really want to encourage people to try top bars, right? And Monty's probably like, hey, we could do that with the lay-ins as well, right? So And y'all going to be here next week. What is the date next week? Well, yeah, because it's a Monday, right? Right, Les?
Yeah.
We're gonna. Are you gonna be here with me? Are you gonna let me
Yeah.
tap dance by myself?
I can be here. Yeah.
I can't be here. Monday, the 28th, we'll be here again.
Okay.
So with that being said, it's 8:35 and I know Les has to go and I didn't realize it was that much. I kept talking. So I really appreciate everybody's questions. Thank you everybody for joining us on YouTube and on Zoom. Les, especially, thank you for all your time and your expertise. And my apologies for the extra 5 minutes.
No problem. Thank you, Natalie, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Anytime. Bye-bye.
We'll talk to you later. Bye. Thanksgiving, yes, but Monday will be good. Yes.